What is going on, alpha males? Men, not boys, not fluid gender, effeminate, beta males. Alpha males, welcome to Alpha Male Podcast, where we talk about what it means to be a man, made in the image of God, strong, dominant, in control. We don't apologize for that. You don't apologize for what you were made to be, for walking that out. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about teaching for results, passing on skills. That's what we're going to talk about today on Alpha Male Podcast. If you could scroll down, like, subscribe. If you have not left a review and this is not your first rodeo here, please leave a review of the podcast. It's a free way you can help out the show. I'm going to do a little bit different bio than I normally do and make it a little bit more germane to the teaching aspect. You probably know I have a military law enforcement background. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I am an FBI handgun instructor for whatever it's worth. Also NRA certified instructor. I have a bunch of other certifications for three-letter government agencies I don't want to specify, but things like advanced weapon instructor, small arms, things like that. So that's a bulk of my instruction. That's where I kind of funneled. I started competition shooting at a very early age, and I realized that I had been blessed, although I wasn't a Christian at the time. I realized that I was blessed with talents in shooting. And I try and pass it on to others. So that's a big bulk of my teaching. But you could apply this to many other skills. Trapping, hunting. I've been a guide, a professional big game guide. I don't apologize for slaying beasts and feeding my family or helping others feed their family. Part of being a good guide is teaching somebody how to hunt. Teaching them about the animals, about the flora and the fauna and how they interact in an environment and how to take yourself as an apex predator on the landscape and put meat on the table for your family. So teaching in that aspect. But again, you could apply this to many other things. So I may mention background stuff, but that's enough of the main layout of the background. Let us go into teaching for results, teaching things that matter, teaching skills. Now, you probably know where I'm going to start. With God, the source of all things, the source of all good things, the one that made us, who gives us everything, including knowledge and any kind of abilities we have, including teaching. The first verse of the day that I'm going to give you is, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Proverbs 9. Whatever, I would submit, whatever you are trying to teach someone, I don't care if it's calculus or urban warfare or how to bake a cake, just by your very being and your interaction with others, if your primary goal in life is not to reflect the light of God in the world, if it's not to grow closer to God and closer to each other, right? That's the prime directive. That's where it all starts. When Jesus is asked the greatest of all the commandments, he says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." This is the greatest of the commandments. And the second like it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's part of teaching, right? Loving your neighbor as yourself. So realize that you should be doing more than just this skill. If I'm teaching you how to tie a bowline knot or pick a lock, I should be teaching you more than that skill. I should be teaching you the overarching thing that I know that God loves me and I know that God loves you. And because you're valuable to God, I'm going to take time out of my day to teach you because he loves you as much as he loves me. Right? God is at the core of everything, whether you want to admit it or not, and he should be at the core of your teaching. Just to get off on a tangent here, look at what happened when God was taken out of schools, when the Bible stopped being the primary doctrine that was taught in schools. The Bible used to be taught in schools. We look at, and speaking as an American, this is a little bit before my time, but we look at major turning points in America, when America kind of went downhill, in my and many others' opinions. Do you think America has gotten better or worse since the 50s? Do you think our culture, our society, our learning, our school children, our public education has gotten better or worse since the 50s? Now, of course, in some ways it's gotten better, but I would submit most of you would probably agree it's gotten worse. They took the Bible out of public schools in the early 60s. A lot of bad things went down in the 60s. You can't remove God from learning. You should not remove God from learning. Otherwise, you're missing the main point. It's the main point of life. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Proverbs 9. Why is this important in teaching in the micro? We talked about the macro. That's the main point of life, period. So if you're failing to teach that, you're failing at life, period. That's a slap in the face. If you need it, you need it. But it's the main reason I started Alpha Male Podcast. I was in charge of teaching new soldiers. And one of the things I was in charge of teaching them, because these young men needed it, was resiliency. We literally had a course called resiliency training. And though I'm not a perfect man, and I was a fairly young Christian at the time, young as in like walking on the Christian path, I realized these young men needed that. They needed strong Christian role models. And I'm far from perfect, but I was there and I was willing to try and step up and teach them. And when I left this was the Army. I served in the Marine Corps and then I served in the Army. When I left the Army, I realized a lot of young men still needed that. So I started Alpha Male Podcast. Instead of teaching in person, I would teach via the podcast. And I wasn't great with tech. I paid some kid that I was trying to mentor at the time who was younger than me, but had skills that I didn't. I was like, here's $100. Get this on the internet. Literally. That was Simple Man Sermons and then Alpha Male. You get the idea. That's the macro. But the micro, some principles that apply, equal weights and equal measures, right? Unequal weights and measures are an abomination. Equal weights and equal measures. If somebody sees you as a teacher, as a role model, they need to see you have equal weights and equal measures, not corrupt, not a hypocrite, right? Hypocrisy is something that Christ rails against. He rails against hypocrisy. Don't be a hypocrite. Have equal weights and measures. Important in life as a man, important as a teacher. Another micro, a verse that plays into this very much. The beginning of wisdom is get wisdom. Another big part of the hypocrisy is you should be able to know it and you should be able to demonstrate it. I have a real pet peeve for and a big part of what I'm going to talk about is shooting, because I have a lot of experience teaching shooting. Marksmanship, right? I don't want an instructor, and I don't particularly care for instructors that are telling you something and they won't get out and shoot in front of you. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case. Maybe there's somebody that was at one time a pinnacle great shooter and is now, disabled or something. They can still teach you. But they're trying to teach you something. They should be able to do it. Right, in my opinion. So don't be a hypocrite. If you're asking somebody to do something, step up in front of them and demonstrate it. And don't be a hypocrite. Hypocrisy. This is one thing I'll talk about in regards to shooting. And that is, if you're interested in getting into shooting, if you're getting into teaching, why should somebody care what you have to say? Now, if they're your kid or you're somebody that's under your dominion and control, because we're called as men to be in dominion and control, then that's one thing. But if it's somebody seeking out a teacher, why should they learn from you? Because you put up a flyer, because you have a bunch of followers on the gram, like why should they care to get teaching from you? You should earn that. Can you put on your dossier, your resume, your CV, whatever the in vogue term is, state rifle and pistol champion, urban warfare instructor, combat veteran? If you're teaching gunfighting, those are important. If you're only teaching marksmanship, maybe expert rifleman in the Marine Corps, state rifle and pistol champion, those things are germane. you don't need somebody with combat experience if you just want to learn the fundamentals. If you want to learn gunfighting, you should probably, and this is a bone to pick I have with many schools that like espouse to teach us stuff, from people that don't have the experience. If I've never owned an oven, if I've never put anything in an oven, I'm probably not the guy to teach you how to bake a cake. So what's your experience? In order to teach a skill, you, I think, should possess the skill and then be able to pass on the skill. Now, there's some people that are phenomenally good shooters that aren't good teachers. But I think having the skill you're teaching is rather important, which means you should be on your game and be good at the thing that you're teaching. Another big thing, and I think this is sorely lacking in our Prussian mainstream education system today, critical thinking and asking why. You should be okay with a student asking you why. Now, if it gets to be so much that you can't teach a class or you can't teach them because they're just constantly asking, that's one thing. But if it's an honest, inquisitive answer as to why, and you can't tell them, that's an issue with you. So have some introspection there. Have some self-examination. Why do you do it this way? Do you know why you do it that way? Be honest if you don't and say, I don't know, but this is the way I'm going to teach you because that's all that I know. But don't be shy to ask yourself why. Don't be shy when a student asks why. That's an important learning thing, right? What do little kids do all the time? Why? Again, it can get to a point where it's ridiculous and a distraction. But if it's an honest search for knowledge, right, the beginning of wisdom is get wisdom. You got to ask why. Why do you hold the gun this way? Why do you focus on the front sight? If you're just like, that's because that's what I say. Like I can articulate I'm not going to get into it because that's probably a better thing for Gunfighter Life, the other podcast, but I can very clearly articulate why most of the time you focus on the front sight and sometimes you don't. But I can articulate that in a coherent manner. Why do you hold the handgun this way and not this way? Right? I should be able to articulate that, not because I say so. Right? You should be able to articulate that. Don't be afraid to be asked why. If you can't take getting asked why on basic fundamental questions that you're probably going to get asked, be honest, you're probably not ready to be a teacher because you got to deal with that. And you should. Here's another thing. You're not right all the time. How do I know? Because I'm not right all the time. There was only one man who ever lived that was right all the time. And that's Christ. I'm not Christ. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Are you looking for results? Are you looking for them to affirm that everything that you're doing is right? If that's the reason you're becoming a teacher, for gratification, for being put up on a pedestal, for hand claps, I would submit that's probably not a great motive. Hubris is probably not the best motive to teach. There are some things where it'll kind of be your way or the highway because it's not your way, it's the established safe way, like the firearm safety rules. Like, you have to keep your gun pointed in this direction on this range, and if not, I'm not going to teach you because lives depend on it. Right? There's a time for that. You can explain why if they ask why, but that's like a hard and fast rule. If your goal is to get a certain skill set and they do it a different way and there's no fundamental problem with that way, there's no safety issue, there's no nothing else, is the goal for you just to be right, or is the goal results? Like, there's probably two main ways that I would teach you how to tie a bowline knot. If somebody knows a third way to tie a bowline knot and it is in fact a bowline knot, I don't care. If they already know it, or they know a different way, or they can show me a better way, I'm all for it. You don't have to tie a bowline knot the way that I show you to tie a bowline knot if the goal is to get a bowline knot. Problem solved. Now, there may be something they're doing that you correct even though it's working at the time because you know down the road it'll be an issue. Like in shooting stance, the weaver works fine if you're shooting one target stationary, which is where people start. But if you're running from one form of cover to another form of cover and getting hits on the move, weaver stance doesn't really work. You can explain that to them if they ask why, but that's an example of, it might be working right now, but here's why we're not going to do that, because in the future it won't work as well, and I know that from experience. But if their grip is not exactly your grip, but it's rock solid and it's good and they shoot well, right? Is the goal to get them to shoot well, or is the goal to get them to do exactly what you want them to do because you have a power trip? Because if that's the case, right, that's a you problem, not a student problem. If it's not a moral issue, if it's not a safety issue, if it's not a problem down the road issue, you should have the humility to be like, oh, I never thought of that. Maybe that is better. Or, yeah, that's not the way I shoot, but if it works for you and there's no fundamental issue with it, go ahead. If that's the way you tie a bowline, go ahead. Part of being a good teacher is being a perpetual student. I've had a lot of firearms training. I like to get more. I like to still seek out other venues and other things and try new things. I've done that this year. Otherwise, you get stagnant. I don't agree with everything, but that everybody teaches. And I've changed what I've taught over time because I've gotten better techniques, but I get that through getting training and being a perpetual student. If you want to be a good teacher, you need to be a good learner. Just like in the military, if you want to be a good leader, you have to be good at following orders too. It's just how that works. Right? And I've been the commander of a tactical team. If somebody's never listening to me, never doing what they're supposed to do, am I likely to promote that person to a leadership position? Right? But the thing we talked about, hypocrisy, why would he expect his dudes to listen to him when they know that he doesn't listen? Right? So hypocrisy is a big deal, but if you want somebody to be a good student, you should also be a good student. There's a quote, and I forget who said it, don't be so open-minded that your brain falls out. Like, gender is fluid. No, that's ridiculous. That's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Don't be that open-minded. But if somebody's like, I saw this new technique, center axis relock. I'm like, oh, I never saw that technique. Let me try it. Before I'm like, I wasn't taught that in the Marine Corps. That's got to be stupid. Like, no. Like, there's a time and a place to be open-minded and be a perpetual student. Realize that not everybody learns the same way. And it's not always obvious. Right? There are 12-year-old girls that respond pretty well to tough love. And there are 300-pound jacked-up muscly dudes that respond very poorly to tough love. They need gentle TLC when you're teaching them. And some 12-year-old girls will respond better if you're heavy-handed. I don't mean literally like smacking them. I mean like as far as like being abrupt in your teaching and chastisement. And some grown men will respond very differently. Likewise, you could have a 12-year-old girl that shoots phenomenally well with a handgun. Doesn't flinch, doesn't throw shots low left, and you could have a 300-pound muscly dude that's an MMA fighter that's horrible at it. So you can't just have one teaching technique. A technique that will work for, even if they're all 22-year-old Marines. Not everybody's going to get it the first time, and not everybody's going to get it at your default teaching method. So you need other teaching methods. Some people are visual. Some people are auditory. Some people are kinesthetic. Some people are different combinations of all three of those things. If you're trying to get a technique down to somebody and they're not getting it, can you switch techniques and get them to understand it, get them to comprehend it? Right? If you've told them till you're blue in the face, this is the proper shooting grip, the proper shooting technique, and they're just not getting it, it's probably a problem with you. There are bad students. I'm not going to pretend they're not, but maybe you need to grab their hands. Literally put your muscles on their muscles and say, this muscle in your hand needs to be tight. This muscle in your hand needs to be loose. This knuckle needs to be like this. And then it just snaps for them. Right? That's a you teaching thing. You need to be able to teach different people different ways. Not everybody learns the same way. And if you're just giving a lecture and a PowerPoint and they don't get it, right, again, are you teaching for results or are you just up there to hear yourself talk? Because not everybody learns great that way. Likewise, I could be in the same class and somebody that I did that hand technique and I grabbed their hands and my muscles on their muscles, that might work really well. But another person, they still don't get it. So I have to have them step back off the line, grab their gun, and have them watch me shoot their gun in the proper technique, and then they get it. Again, different people learn different ways. There's a lot that plays into that. Age, culture, personality, the way they learn. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. And that's you being a good teacher and teaching for results. You teach a certain way and they don't get it, repeating it 5 more times probably is not going to help them get it. Again, are you there just to hear yourself talk and be like, oh, these students? Are you there to actually get results? It's not about you, right? If you're teaching, you're there to serve God and you're there to serve your fellow man. You're not there to serve you. So be humble and remember that. It's on you to get through to the student. Again, there are bad students. There are students that are just never going to get certain things, but it's on you to get through to the student. And that'll transition us towards the getting out of this episode. Blessings are meant to be shared, right? To he who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. Remember the parable of the talents. Some are given more talents than others, but when you use your talents, they are multiplied. This is literally a parable in the Bible if you're not familiar with it. And Jesus literally says, to he who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But he who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Use the talents you've been given. That can mean teaching and teaching others and sharing your talents. Talents are a blessing. Blessings are meant to be shared, not hoarded. Right? Blessings are meant to be shared. So share them. Use them, multiply them, share them. It's also written, to whom much is given, much is required. If you're good at something, and you're blessed with the ability to teach, because not everybody that's good at something can teach, but if you're blessed with those 2 things, get out there and teach. It's the reason I do this podcast, right? I did it for years where it just cost me money. I don't do it for me, I do it for you guys. Because blessings are meant to be shared. If this helped anybody, it's not about me. That's a blessing. With that, guys, it seems like there's been a lot of tactical tips and tactical verses of the day in here, so I'm probably just going to wrap it up. I appreciate you guys listening. I appreciate all that you do if you support the podcast. If you are a patron, there should be a Patreon link in the show notes. If you have left a review, a cheap, easy way to support the podcast. If you're interested in the gun stuff, check out Gunfighter Life. What a beautiful verse. To he who has, more shall be given. What a good God we serve. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.